The late 1950s in Hollywood was an era of manufactured perfection and unparalleled glamour. It was a time when the studio system still held tightly to its carefully crafted illusions, beaming flawless heroes and picture-perfect romances directly into the living rooms of millions of Americans. The television sets of the decade served as glowing portals to a world where good always triumphed over evil, where the dialogue was sharp and the costumes were absolutely immaculate. But behind the heavy velvet curtains, the bright studio lights, and the closed soundstage doors, the reality was often far more complicated, far darker, and infinitely more human. Over 65 years have passed since a mysterious masked rider first galloped across those black and white screens, slashing his iconic signature into the very fabric of pop culture. The show was an absolute cultural phenomenon from its very first broadcast. Entire families would gather around their living room sets, utterly mesmerized by the romanticized vision of early California, the sweeping orchestral scores, and the thrilling choreography of steel clashing in the night. Children ran through the streets wearing black capes, crossing makeshift swords and dreaming of grand adventures under the stars. But the brilliant actors who breathed life into this legendary series went on to live sweeping, dramatic sagas of their own out in the real world. Their lives became stories overflowing with secret weddings, whispered scandals, quiet heartbreak, and astonishing personal transformations that absolutely nobody in the entertainment industry saw coming. When the cameras stopped rolling and the studio lots emptied out, the flawless Hollywood facade began to fracture. The devoted public saw smiling, confident faces on the covers of glossy magazines, but they rarely knew the shadowed truths lurking just out of frame. Did you know that one of the most famous men to ever grace this production, a man who defined swashbuckling heroism for an entire generation, was found dead a full week after his passing? His lonely departure went entirely unnoticed by the very world that had once worshipped his every move. Or consider the chilling behind-the-scenes reality of one of the show's most beautiful and promising actresses. At the height of her career, she found herself the target of severe, relentless death threats from a psychiatric patient, a terrifying ordeal born entirely out of a stranger's dangerous, lingering obsession with the late Marilyn Monroe. And then there was the man who provided the heart and the laughter, the actor who played the funniest and most universally adored character on the show. Behind his boisterous on-screen charm and signature booming voice lay a quiet, devastating tragedy. He succumbed to throat cancer at the terribly young age of 57, his final days marked by a deeply poignant, unspoken farewell journey with his absolute best friend and former co-star. Today, we are stepping past the guarded studio gates and peeling back the golden veneer of mid-century Hollywood to tell you the real, unvarnished stories of the artists who gave us a legend. We will look at those who miraculously made it to see today, those who left us far too soon, and the hidden pain that shadowed their steps in the decades that followed the show's cancellation. At the center of it all was a man who seemed completely invincible. He possessed striking movie star bone structure, an aristocratic posture, and a natural physical grace that made him look utterly born for romantic adventure before he ever uttered a single line of dialogue. He was the perfect leading man, the enigmatic figure who wore the mask and carried the weight of a monumental franchise on his broad shoulders. Yet, beneath the dashing exterior, the confident smirk, and the flashing silver blade, a profound loneliness was slowly taking root. It was a silent burden and an impending downfall that would eventually lead him far away from the glittering Hollywood hills, driving him toward a tragic, isolated conclusion on another continent. The path to stardom was never as smooth as the silver screen suggested. For those who breathed life into the corrupt and vibrant world of old Los Angeles, the journey was a complex mix of grueling physical labor, professional uncertainty, and the constant pressure to maintain an image of invincibility. Take Britt Lomond, for example. To the audience, he was the sneering, brutal Commandant Monasterio, the villain everyone loved to despise. Audiences felt a genuine, visceral hatred for him from the moment he appeared in the first scene. That was, of course, the entire point, but few viewers realized that behind that cruel, calculated snarl was a man of extraordinary caliber. Lomond was not merely an actor, he was a decorated war hero. He had served as a paratrooper during the Second World War, returning home with 3 Purple Hearts, a silver star, and a bronze star. He had faced the grim reality of combat in Korea as well. When he stepped onto the set as the villain, he brought a posture and an intensity that simply could not be faked. Before he ever picked up a script, he was a nationally ranked fencer, consistently placing within the top 30 amateurs in the country. He had even qualified for the 1952 Olympic Games in Helsinki, only to walk away from his athletic dreams to pursue a life in theatre and film. That level of dedication made the sword fights on the show truly distinct. Both he and his on-screen rival agreed to perform every single one of their own stunts, without the aid of doubles. The tangible tension you witnessed during their duels was not the result of clever camera angles or careful editing. It was the result of two elite athletes going head-to-head with razor-sharp blades. Interestingly, both men had actually auditioned for both the hero and the villain roles. One singular decision by the casting director forever tied their professional destinies together. Then there was the man who provided the legal machinery for the show's corruption. Then Wyan, playing the role of the enforcer Pina. While the lead stars captured the spotlight, men like Wyan were the professional glue that kept the industry running. He was a master of making a scene feel genuinely dangerous with nothing more than a tense glance or a sharp delivery. Pina was in essence a coward hiding behind a briefcase, a character archetype for the corrupt official that has unfortunately never gone out of style. He was a living link to the very first episodes, a quiet, reliable professional who never sought the marquee but always earned his keep on the call sheet. His death in 2015 passed with almost no fanfare or public acknowledgement, marking the quiet, final closing of an era that had once been the talk of the town. Similarly, Nesta Piva, the innkeeper Tio Gonzalez, lived a life defined by sheer relentless persistence. One of 12 children, he saw half of his siblings pass away in infancy, a reality that left a permanent mark on his spirit. He seemed to move through life with a desperate, driven energy, as if he were trying to live on behalf of the ones who were denied the chance. By the time he joined the production at the age of 52, he had already amassed a staggering 400 film credits. He was one of the most prolific character actors in the history of the business, a man whose face was instantly recognizable, even if his name remained obscure to the public. He was the only actor to ever appear in both the iconic monster film, Creature from the Black Lagoon, and its sequel. Even as his health failed, and he underwent a massive surgery to remove most of his stomach due to cancer, he never stopped working. The production was also defined by those who moved in two different worlds simultaneously. Peter Adams, who played Captain Arturo Toledano, was a man of genuine substance. Coming from a wealthy family with significant real estate holdings on Wilshire Boulevard, acting was never a desperate financial necessity for him. It was a matter of purpose. He brought a carefully measured dignity to his role as the hard-edged military commander. Yet, when the cameras cut, he dedicated himself to the California Epilepsy Society and recorded thousands of hours of audiobooks for the Braille Institute, using his voice to serve those who could not see. He was a man who balanced the cold, cutthroat world of Los Angeles business with the artistic fulfillment of the stage, never letting either identity completely consume him. This juxtaposition of worlds was common among the cast. Consider Jan Arvon, the man who played Don Ignacio Torres. He was the quintessential working actor, the face that appeared in the background of 1,000 stories. He was part of the very wallpaper of mid-century Hollywood, a man who ensured the show felt grounded and authentic. Without his portrayal of the nobleman being unjustly arrested, the series would have lacked the necessary emotional stakes. It was his performance that gave the masked hero a righteous, moral reason to put on the cowl. He moved from project to project, never a household name, but always essential, always working, always professional. The allure of the Golden Age was blinding, but the reality was a collection of individual lives, some of them incredibly distinguished, others devastatingly brief, all striving to maintain their footing in industry that could discard them as quickly as it had elevated them. Behind the masks, the capes, and the iconic signatures on the screen, these were people grappling with their own mortality, their own families, and the weight of their own legacies. They were building a myth, not realizing that the myth would eventually outgrow them entirely, obscuring the human beings who had built it piece by piece in the cold, unglamorous light of the soundstage. The glossy veneer of the Hollywood machine often hid deep, private struggles that the public was never meant to witness. While the world saw adventure and heroism on their television sets, behind closed doors, the actors were navigating a reality that was frequently defined by personal loss, professional rejection, and, in some cases, truly harrowing experiences that would have shattered lesser individuals. Take the case of M.N.A. Fee, the actress who portrayed Maria Crespo. Publicly, she was the beautiful romantic interest who captured hearts, with critics frequently drawing comparisons between her and Elizabeth Taylor. Fee, however, had a fire in her spirit that made her deeply uncomfortable with the restrictive good girl roles the studios forced upon her. She was a woman who wanted more, yet she found herself caught in a chilling narrative that was far more dangerous than anything found in a film script. In the mid-60s, while she was involved in a high-profile relationship with the baseball legend Joe DiMaggio, her life took a dark, unexpected turn. She began receiving a series of terrifying death threats that reached into the core of her personal life. The FBI investigation eventually traced these threats to a patient in a psychiatric facility in San Jose, a man who lived in a delusionary state where he could not accept that DiMaggio had moved on from his marriage to Marilyn Monroe. It was a stark, disturbing example of how a star's association with the icons of the era could lead to dangerous obsession and a loss of personal safety that the studios conveniently ignored in order to protect their public image. The drama continued in the life of Jolene Brand, whose journey to the screen began with humble, hard-working roots. A former county fair queen and a talented, left-handed softball pitcher for a professional women's team, she brought a grounded, authentic charm to the role of Ana Maria Verdugo. But even for those who seemed to have the world at their feet, the fragility of life was always present. Following her time on the show, she became deeply enmeshed in the inner circle of the avant-garde comedian Ernie Kovacs. When Kovacs was tragically killed in a sudden car accident in 1962, the loss shattered the close-knit social world Brand had built for herself. The public saw only the actress, but behind the scenes, she was navigating the profound grief and the sudden instability of the Hollywood social ecosystem. The struggle was perhaps most visible in the lives of those whose characters were not traditional heroes. Gene Sheldon, who portrayed the iconic mute servant Bernardo, was a master of a dying art form. A veteran of vaudeville and a virtuoso banjo player, he understood that silence was a powerful tool in storytelling. He could convey nuance, humor, and danger without uttering a single word. Yet, despite his incredible technical talent and his history of performing alongside legends like Fred Astaire, the industry had a habit of overlooking such masters when they were no longer deemed young or fashionable. By the time his work began to find a new, appreciative audience through television reruns, Sheldon had already quietly receded into his later years, never witnessing the full extent of the legacy he had helped create. Perhaps the most tragic turning point was the experience of Henry Calvin, the actor who brought Sergeant Garcia to life. To the audience, he was the lovable, bumbling giant whose singing voice provided the soul of the series. But as the years pressed on, the physical toll of his lifestyle and the industry's demands became impossible to ignore. In 1973, he undertook a journey to Argentina alongside his dear friend and co-star, Guy Williams, to participate in a charity event. For those who knew them, the images from that trip were haunting. Calvin appeared gaunt, visibly weakened by the throat cancer that would eventually claim his life. It was a journey of mutual support between two men who had shared the highest highs of fame and were now facing the silent, inevitable decline that comes for everyone. They were two legends at the twilight of their journey, traveling together to offer one last testament to their friendship before the curtain finally fell. It was not a grand, cinematic exit, it was a quiet, intimate goodbye between two men who had been through the fire of the public eye and were now standing on the other side of the spotlight, facing the reality of their own mortality with dignity and grace. Far from the cameras that had once captured their most triumphant moments. The passage of time has a profound way of sorting out the temporary flashes of celebrity from the truly enduring marks of historical legacy. As the decades rolled on, the remarkable individuals who occupied this fictional universe scattered into wildly different chapters of American cultural history, leaving behind fascinating, little-known biographical truths, and final years that were as complex as they were poignant. Richard Anderson, who had gracefully crossed swords as a charming rival for romance, effortlessly transitioned from the traditional studio system into the modern era of network television. He eventually achieved prime-time immortality in the 1970s as the calm, authoritative Oscar Goldman, making history as the first actor to play the exact same character on two different networks simultaneously. His long life bridged the gap between post-war cinema contracts at MGM and the birth of modern television, demonstrating a professional longevity that few of his peers could ever match. Meanwhile, Joan Evans, once heavily promoted by major studios as the exciting next Susan Hayward, made a choice that was almost completely unprecedented in old Hollywood. Recognizing the ruthless, all-consuming nature of the studio machine, she deliberately walked away from her mounting professional momentum to focus entirely on her marriage and family. Growing up surrounded by scripts and rehearsals due to her artistic parents, she understood the true cost of fame and chose privacy over celebrity. Her legacy became one of absolute personal autonomy, a rare and dignified story of a woman who refused to let a studio contract dictate her life, proving that the most profound victories are often the ones achieved entirely away from the cameras. Others found their legacy in their remarkable versatility and the unique ability to completely transcend the rigid boundaries the industry attempted to place around them. Don Diamond, universally loved as the bumbling Corporal Reyes, pulled off one of the greatest illusions in television history. Though audiences were entirely convinced he was of native Spanish heritage, he was actually a Jewish kid from Brooklyn who had simply mastered the language and its specific nuances through sheer dedication and formal study after his service in the Army Air Corps. He continued to bring immense joy to audiences in later comedy universes like F Troop, before quietly battling Parkinson's disease in his final years, leaving behind a reputation as a consummate professional. George J. Lewis, who brought such fierce principles and emotional depth to his portrayal of the family patriarch, was a Mexican-born actor whose striking looks drew early comparisons to the great legends of silent cinema. Navigating an era that struggled to understand his multifaceted talents, Lewis had a deep, historical connection to the mythology, having played the male lead in a related serial 13 years before the television show even began. He wisely utilized his broker's license to build a highly successful real estate career, ensuring a comfortable, secure life, far removed from the volatile whims of casting directors. And then there are the precious few who remain with us as living monuments to that golden epoch. Barbara Luna, who entered the production as a young Tamil seller, carved out an extraordinary career that spanned from singing in French on Broadway as a child to going toe-to-toe with Captain Kirk in the original Star Trek series. Born to a multi-ethnic family of Hungarian, Italian and Filipino roots, she used her unique background to conquer various roles across 500 television appearances. Today, her enduring presence serves as a magnificent, living bridge to an era of show business that will never be replicated. But it is the fate of the central hero, the man who wore the mask, that casts the longest and most melancholic shadow over this Hollywood chronicle. Guy Williams, born Armando Catalano in Manhattan, possessed the kind of breathtaking physical grace, towering stature, and classic movie star charisma that seemed destined to rule the entertainment world forever. He had trained in fencing since childhood under his father's guidance, ensuring that every duel he performed alongside his co-stars was filled with real speed, danger, and impeccable timing. Yet, the very role that brought him global adoration also became a gilded cage. Hollywood, with its distinct lack of imagination, struggled to see past the unforgettable images he created, leaving him trapped between the memory of the Masked Rider and his subsequent success as the space-faring patriarch in Lost in Space. Feeling increasingly alienated by an industry that viewed him more as a commercial product than a developing artist, Williams found a profound, unexpected rebirth thousands of miles away from the West Coast. In 1973, a promotional trip to Argentina transformed his life entirely. Met by 50,000 screaming fans who treated him with an almost religious reverence, he discovered a culture that loved him with an intensity he had never experienced in America. He eventually made the upscale Recoleta neighborhood of Buenos Aires his permanent home, stepping completely away from the cynical Hollywood grind to live a peaceful, dignified life where he could walk the streets simply as a respected gentleman rather than a relic of a bygone studio era. The final chapter of his journey, however, arrived with a devastating quiet tragedy that deeply shocked the world he had left behind. In May of 1989, after local friends noticed his unusual absence from his usual haunts, authorities entered his apartment to discover that the great romantic icon had passed away from a cerebral aneurysm a full week prior. He had died completely alone, his passing unnoticed for days by the world that had once hung on his every movement. It was a heartbreaking, isolated end for a man who had brought so much light, adventure, and joy into the lives of millions of children and adults across the globe. His ashes remained in a vault in Argentina for 2 years before finally being returned to his homeland. A quiet conclusion to a life lived across 2 continents. It wasn't until 2011 that he was officially named a Disney legend, a tragically late but deeply necessary recognition of the indelible mark he left on popular culture. The stories of these actors, their secret triumphs, their terrifying trials, their quiet exits, and their enduring survival reveal the true cost of the glamour we still celebrate today. They were real people who gave everything to create a timeless myth, leaving behind a collective legacy that continues to shine. Long after the final credits have rolled and the studio lights have gone completely dark, Hollywood Retrospective, The Hidden Tragedies of the Original Zorro cast reverberating. New details emerge on the lonely final days of television icon Guy Williams in Buenos Aires behind the mask. How World War II hero Britt Lohman transformed into the screen's most hated villain. Hollywood Shadows, the terrifying real-life stalker ordeal that targeted actress Myrna Fahy. Final journey.